Faith Lewis knew something was wrong the moment the elevator doors closed behind her. Not danger, opportunity. 16 hours into another hospital shift, her body ached, her scrubs damp with sweat, her nerves raw from pretending not to notice wandering hands and cruel jokes. At 43, she had learned one rule well. Attention was never free. It always cost her something. Her phone vibrated. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Almost. Faith Lewis, a woman said calmly. We need you for a private medical issue. Cash payment. $50,000. No paperwork. Faith stopped walking. That number wasn't generous. It was suspicious. What kind of issue? Faith asked. A pause, then one that requires discretion, absolute silence, and quick thinking. Faith thought of the hospital that never protected her, the complaints that vanished, the debt that kept her stuck. She thought of how close desperation sat to courage, and how fast both could turn dangerous. When? She asked. Now. A car will be there in 15 minutes. Pack for 3 days. The call ended. Faith stood in the parking garage, staring at her reflection in her car window. This wasn't rescue. This was a test. The kind where one mistake got you buried or bought you freedom. She got in the car anyway, because when you've spent your life surviving tight spaces, you learn something important. Sometimes the way out doesn't look like an exit at all. Before we go any further, if you believe some stories deserve to be told all the way to the end, subscribe now. Not for me, for the characters who don't get a second chance once this story starts. The black Mercedes arrived at precisely midnight, its sleek lines and tinted windows speaking of wealth that Faith could barely comprehend. No questions were asked, no small talk was offered by the driver, an absolutely massive man whose neck was literally thicker than Faith's thigh, his shoulders so impossibly broad he had to angle himself carefully to fit properly in the driver's seat. His hands on the steering wheel looked like they could crush concrete without effort. They drove through Lagos for what felt like an eternity, 40 long minutes of leaving the familiar streets behind, heading steadily toward the industrial district, where streetlights became increasingly sparse and massive warehouses loomed like sleeping giants against the dark sky. The journey took them through neighborhoods Faith had never visited, past chain-link fences topped with razor wire, around corners where shadowy figures watched their passing with predatory interest. This was a part of Lagos that tourists never saw, that didn't appear in promotional materials, where normal rules didn't seem to apply. Faith's anxiety grew with each passing mile, but she forced herself to remain calm. She'd made her choice. $50,000. Freedom. The car finally stopped smoothly in front of a building that looked completely abandoned from the outside, its windows dark and empty, graffiti covering the lower walls in elaborate tags and crude drawings. The structure appeared ready for demolition, forgotten and forsaken, but appearances, as Faith was about to learn, could be profoundly deceiving. Inside was shockingly, dramatically different. The moment they passed through the reinforced steel door, everything changed. Marble floors gleamed under subtle, expertly placed lighting that created an atmosphere of refined elegance. Artwork that probably cost more than Faith's annual salary hung on walls papered in expensive fabric. Armed men in impeccably tailored suits stationed themselves at every corner like lethal decorations, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. This wasn't a hospital or medical clinic. This was a fortress masquerading as luxury, a place where violence and wealth existed in careful balance. Ms. Lewis, a woman in her 60s, approached with graceful precision, elegant in a perfectly tailored charcoal dress that probably cost more than Faith's car. Her silver hair was pulled back in a sophisticated chignon, her makeup subtle but expert, her bearing that of someone accustomed to authority and respect. I'm Eleanor Kwan, Mr. Lee's personal assistant and confidant. Thank you for coming on such short notice and under such mysterious circumstances. Before we proceed any further, I need your absolute word. Everything you see here, everything you hear, every detail of this consultation dies with you. Complete confidentiality is non-negotiable. Are we absolutely clear on this point? "You're paying me enough to forget my own name," Faith replied, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice despite her racing heart and sweating palms. Eleanor's lips curved slightly in what might have been approval. "Good. I can see why you came highly recommended. Your discretion and professionalism have been noted in your file. Follow me closely and try not to appear too shocked by what you see." They walked through corridors that smelled incongruously of expensive cologne and gun oil, a combination Faith's emergency room experience helped her immediately recognize. She'd worked in enough chaotic emergency rooms to recognize the peculiar scent of violence lurking beneath civilized surfaces, the metallic tang of blood mixed with expensive aftershave, the bitter smell of gunpowder residue that no amount of cleaning could completely eliminate. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept moving forward with determined steps. $50,000. Freedom! A chance to start over and rebuild her shattered life. They passed rooms where men spoke in hushed tones, their conversations stopping abruptly as Eleanor and Faith walked by. Faith caught glimpses of computer monitors displaying security feeds, stacks of cash being counted by machine, weapons being cleaned and maintained with professional efficiency. This wasn't just wealthy, this was organized, militaristic, dangerous. She'd walked into something far beyond a simple medical consultation. The bedroom was genuinely larger than Faith's entire cramped apartment, possibly larger than her entire floor of her apartment building. And on the massive bed, propped against silk pillows that probably cost more than her monthly rent, sat the most striking man Faith had ever encountered in her entire life, Lee Min-ho. Even sitting casually against the pillows, she could tell he was exceptionally tall, probably 6'2" or 6'3" based on his proportions and the way his legs extended across the bed. He had a sharp jawline that could cut glass, dark eyes that assessed her with the calculated intensity of a predator actively deciding if she was prey or potential threat. His black hair was pushed back carelessly from his face, still slightly damp as if he'd recently showered. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing just the edge of an intricate tattoo that disappeared tantalizingly beneath the expensive fabric, what looked like a dragon's scales rendered in remarkable detail. "You're the nurse?" His voice was deep, heavily accented with Korean inflections, inherently dangerous in a way that made Faith's survival instincts flare with warning signals. "I'm Faith Lewis. I have 15 years of hard-earned experience in emergency and internal medicine, specializing in trauma care." She met his intimidating gaze directly, absolutely refusing to flinch or look away first. She'd dealt with enough powerful men who thought they could intimidate her into submission through sheer force of presence. "What's the medical problem we're addressing?" Eleanor cleared her throat delicately. "Mr. Lee has a rather delicate issue, one that requires both substantial medical expertise and absolute discretion. This is not a matter that can be addressed through normal medical channels for reasons that will become clear." Lee's jaw visibly tightened, muzzles bunching. For just a moment, Faith saw something unexpected flicker in those dark, dangerous eyes. Not anger or irritation, but genuine humiliation mixed with long-suppressed vulnerability. It made him suddenly, startlingly human rather than merely intimidating. "I haven't been able to achieve an erection in 15 years. He said bluntly, his accent thickening noticeably with emotion. "Multiple doctors across 3 countries, Korea, Japan, and here in Nigeria. Multiple expensive treatments, medications, injections, devices, everything available. Nothing has worked. Not one single thing has made any difference." Faith set down her medical bag with deliberate calm and pulled out her tablet, switching immediately into professional mode. This was familiar territory, medical problems she could analyze and potentially solve, unlike the complicated emotional landscape of her personal life. Any documented trauma, physical or psychological events that might have triggered this condition? Gunshot wound, lower abdomen, multiple entry points. Lee lifted his expensive shirt without hesitation, revealing an extensive network of surgical scars across his muscular torso. Faith had seen plenty of gunshot wounds throughout her career in emergency medicine, but these were extraordinarily extensive. Surgical scars layered strategically over bullet entry points, clear evidence of multiple complex operations performed over time. I nearly died on the operating table twice during the initial surgeries. They told my mother I had less than 10% chance of survival. "Who performed the surgeries initially?" she asked, already calculating possibilities and complications in her analytical mind, running through likely scenarios and treatment options. "Military doctors in Seoul initially, at the Armed Forces Medical Command, then various private physicians afterward when complications arose. I've seen specialists in reconstructive surgery, urology, neurology, psychology, 15 different doctors. Nothing has worked." "Did anyone specifically check for nerve damage, specifically the pudendal nerve and the pelvic splanchnic nerves?" She moved closer professionally, her medical instinct overriding her initial nervousness about proximity to this dangerous man. "Gunshot wounds to the lower abdomen can cause incredibly complex injuries that aren't immediately apparent. If the trauma damaged the critical nerve pathways or caused significant scar tissue formation over time, it could compress the neurovascular bundle responsible for erectile function. It's actually more common than most people realize in cases of severe abdominal trauma." Lee stared at her intently, his dark eyes widening slightly. 15 different doctors examined me, ran every test imaginable. Not one single person mentioned that specific possibility. They focused on blood flow, on psychological factors, on hormone levels, but never nerve compression from scarring. Because they were probably focusing exclusively on keeping you alive first, then treating the immediately obvious damage. Emergency medicine is about triage. You address the life-threatening issues first. Faith pulled out her stethoscope efficiently, but nerve damage can be extremely subtle, especially if scar tissue develops gradually over months or years rather than immediately. The symptoms might not present until long after the initial healing period. "I need to examine you properly and thoroughly to assess the extent of the scarring and test nerve response in the affected areas." Eleanor moved diplomatically toward the door. "I'll give you appropriate privacy for the examination." "Stay," Lee commanded firmly, his voice brooking no argument. Then, to Faith with slightly less edge, "Do whatever you need to do. I have no secrets from Eleanor. She's been with my family for 30 years. Faith had examined literally thousands of patients throughout her career, from gunshot victims to car accident survivors to individuals who'd suffered every conceivable type of injury. She'd learned early in her training to separate the clinical from the personal, to see bodies as complex biological systems that needed fixing rather than sources of judgment or shame. But as she conducted the thorough examination, methodically checking reflexes in his legs and feet, carefully testing sensation responses across his abdomen and groin, gently palpating the extensively scarred tissue to map the damage, she felt Lee's intense eyes on her constantly. Not with disgust or the kind of mockery she'd grown unfortunately accustomed to at the hospital, not with cruel amusement at her size or appearance, with something else entirely. Respect, maybe, for her professional competence, or simply profound relief that someone was finally taking him seriously as a patient, rather than dismissing his concerns or offering the same ineffective treatments. The examination took nearly 45 minutes. Faith was thorough, testing nerve responses at multiple points, checking blood flow through palpation and a portable Doppler device, examining the scar tissue for unusual density or positioning. Lee endured it all in stoic silence, though she could feel tension in his muscles, see the way his hands occasionally clenched into fists when she touched particularly sensitive areas. "The scarring is genuinely extensive," she said professionally, pulling her examination gloves off with a snap. "You're lucky to be alive based on the trajectory patterns I can discern. But I think there's something additional happening here beyond just the physical damage. Your body language, the way you instinctively tense when I approach certain specific areas. You're not just dealing with straightforward physical damage. There's significant psychological trauma layered on top of the physical injuries. Your body is protecting you from something. Lee's expression darkened noticeably, clouds passing over his features. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying that even if we successfully address the nerve damage through surgical intervention, if your mind is actively protecting you from something traumatic, your body simply won't cooperate with treatment. The mind and body are connected in ways we're only beginning to understand. Faith sat in the chair across from him, maintaining eye contact, her voice gentle but unflinchingly firm. What happened after you were shot? Beyond the physical injuries, what else did you endure? Silence stretched uncomfortably between them, heavy with unspoken pain. Eleanor shifted position uncomfortably near the door, her usual composure cracking slightly. I was tortured, Lee finally said, his voice flat and emotionless in that way trauma survivors often adopted when discussing their worst experiences. For 3 consecutive days, 72 hours, they wanted detailed information about my organization's operations, our supply chains, our financial networks, the identities of our allies. They used... He stopped abruptly, his hands clenching into white-knuckled fists. They specifically used my injuries against me. Strategically, they would press on the gunshot wounds, manipulate them, cause excruciating pain in cycles designed to break me psychologically. And they made threats about what they would do to me sexually once they'd extracted the information they needed. Faith's stomach turned violently, bile rising in her throat. She'd treated torture victims before during her career. Desperate refugees who'd fled unimaginable horrors in their home countries, seeking asylum and medical care in Nigeria. The human body remembered what the conscious mind desperately tried to forget. Trauma embedded itself in neural pathways, created protective responses that persisted long after the original threat had passed. Then we have 2 distinct problems to solve, and they're interconnected, she said calmly, keeping her voice steady and professional, even as her heart ached for what he'd endured. The physical nerve damage and the psychological barrier your mind has constructed to protect you from re-experiencing trauma. The physical part, I can definitely help with that aspect. I know an exceptional specialist in nerve reconstruction, someone who owes me a significant favor from years ago and won't ask uncomfortable questions about the circumstances. He's one of the best in his field. The psychological part, that's considerably harder, but not impossible with proper treatment. You'll need therapy with someone who specializes in trauma, probably EMDR or somatic experiencing work, and you'll need to be willing to engage with that process honestly. Why are you helping me? Lee asked suddenly, his tone sharp with suspicion. You don't know me. You don't know what I've done, what I'm capable of, the things I've ordered or participated in. Why would you care about fixing someone like me? Faith looked at him. Really looked at him with clear, honest eyes, past the dangerous exterior that screamed warnings, past the obvious wealth and power that surrounded him, past the reputation she could guess he had in this world, straight to the man who'd been broken and couldn't figure out how to fix himself. She saw herself in him somehow, someone the world had decided wasn't worth proper care or consideration. Because someone should, she said simply, her voice carrying conviction, and because I know exactly what it's like when people stop seeing you as human, when they look at you and see only what's wrong, what's different, what doesn't fit their expectations, when they reduce you to a single characteristic and forget there's a whole person underneath. Something shifted in Lee's expression, a crack in his carefully maintained armor. Lee insisted firmly that she stay at the compound while they arranged the specialist consultation and planned the treatment approach. It's safer here, he said, which Faith found darkly amusing considering she was now effectively living in what was essentially a Mafia headquarters surrounded by armed men and illegal activities. But safer turned out to be surprisingly accurate in ways she hadn't anticipated. On her 3rd day at the compound, Eleanor found her in the impressive library, a room filled with leather-bound books in multiple languages and the comforting smell of old paper and wood polish. Faith had been reading medical journals intently on her tablet, trying to research similar cases of traumatic nerve damage and treatment options, cross-referencing studies and case reports. There's something you should know, Eleanor said seriously, sitting across from her in one of the leather chairs with unusual tension evident in her normally composed posture. About why Lee needs this fixed urgently, about what's really at stake here. Faith closed her tablet, giving Eleanor her full attention. That's between him and me professionally. Doctor-patient confidentiality still applies, even in unusual circumstances. This goes beyond confidentiality. There's a succession issue within the organization. Eleanor's voice was low, urgent, almost conspiratorial as she leaned forward. Lee's uncle, Victor Park, is actively challenging his leadership position. In our world, any sign of weakness is literally death. If Victor can prove Lee is incapable in any way, physically, mentally, sexually, he can claim Lee is fundamentally unfit to lead. There will be a formal vote among the Council of Families, and if Lee loses that vote, he dies, Faith finished grimly, understanding flooding through her. Eleanor nodded confirmation, her expression grave. Victor has already been strategically spreading rumors through carefully selected channels. Lee has a month, maybe 2 at most, before the council demands concrete proof of his capability, physical proof, or they'll side with Victor decisively. And once Victor has control, Lee won't survive, Faith completed the thought. No one who's ever been loyal to Lee will survive, Eleanor corrected quietly. Victor is ruthless in ways Lee isn't. Lee has rules, boundaries he won't cross. Victor has none. He'll purge anyone he sees as a potential threat. That includes me. That includes you now by association. That's absolutely barbaric. That's our world. Eleanor leaned back, her face weary. I'm telling you this because you need to understand completely what's at stake. If you can't help him, if this is beyond your expertise or beyond medical science, say so now. Let him prepare another way to survive, to secure his position through different means before time runs out. Faith thought of Lee's face when he'd talked about the torture, the way his voice had cracked just slightly before he'd pulled the emotional walls back up protectively. She thought of all the men who'd dismissed her, hurt her, made her feel worthless, and she thought about Eleanor's fate if Victor won. This elegant woman who'd treated Faith with respect from the first moment. I can help him, she said firmly, but I need complete access to my contacts, and I need Lee to trust me, really trust me, not just professionally, but personally. He already does, Eleanor said quietly. More than he's trusted anyone in years, perhaps ever. Don't waste it. That night, Faith found Lee in his office, surrounded by papers and photographs spread across his massive desk in organized chaos. He looked up when she entered, exhaustion evident in the lines around his eyes and the slight slump in his normally perfect posture. Can't sleep? She asked. Sleep is a luxury I can't afford right now. Too many threats, too many moving pieces. He gestured to a chair beside the desk. You should rest. Tomorrow will be difficult. The preliminary tests before Raj arrives. The specialist arrives tomorrow? Yes, Dr. Malhotra will be here by evening. And there's something else you should see. He pushed a photograph across the desk. Faith picked it up carefully. A blonde woman, beautiful in a cold, calculated way, with sharp features and predatory eyes. That's Helene Voss. She works directly for Victor as his personal operative. 3 weeks ago, she tried to seduce me at a neutral meeting. When that failed spectacularly, she spread detailed rumors about my condition through the underground network. Now Victor has ammunition, and he's using it strategically. Faith studied the photo carefully, noting the woman's expression. She's the leak. She's been feeding Victor information about your operations. Yes, and Victor's planning something major. My sources say there's an attack coming soon, but I don't know when or how specifically. I have pieces of intelligence, but can't see the full picture yet. He rubbed his face wearily, a gesture so human it made Faith's chest ache unexpectedly. I've survived 20 years in this violent world by being consistently 2 steps ahead of my enemies, by anticipating moves before they're made. Now I'm stumbling blind. Then let me help. Faith set the photo down. Not just with the medical issue. You need someone Victor doesn't expect. Someone who can move through your world without raising immediate suspicion. Lee's eyes sharpened with interest. You're offering to spy? I'm offering to be useful beyond medical care. I'm a nurse. I can go anywhere medical services are needed. Your men get hurt regularly. They need treatment. I treat them. I listen carefully. People talk around medical staff like we're furniture. She'd learned that painful lesson repeatedly, hearing her colleagues discuss her cruelly like she wasn't standing right there. They'll talk about operations, about plans, about concerns. I can be your eyes and ears in places you can't go. It's dangerous. If Victor discovers you're reporting to me, so is being broke and powerless in a world that eats people like me for breakfast. Faith held his gaze steadily. I'm already here. I'm already complicit. Let me choose how I participate. Lee studied her for a long, measuring moment, his dark eyes searching her face as if trying to read her soul. Then he smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face from dangerous to devastating, from threatening to almost tender. You're not what I expected. Neither are you. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Faith didn't want to name yet, and connection that felt both dangerous and inevitable. Then Lee's phone buzzed insistently on the desk. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening instantly into something cold and lethal. We have a problem. One of my warehouses just exploded. 4 men confirmed dead, 6 seriously injured, 2 missing. This wasn't an accident. He stood quickly. I need to go immediately. I'm coming with you, Faith said, already grabbing her medical bag from where she'd left it near the door. Faith, you said your men are injured. I'm a trauma nurse. This is literally what I do, what I trained for. He hesitated, then nodded decisively. Stay close to me, always within my line of sight. The warehouse was absolute chaos when they arrived. Flames still licked hungrily at the collapsed sections of the building, firefighters battling the blaze while Lee's men tried desperately to pull survivors from the smoking rubble. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning chemicals. Faith rushed toward the injured immediately, her training taking over completely. Compound fracture left leg, she called out, kneeling beside a young man whose bone protruded sickeningly through his skin. I need clean water, sterile bandages, and something to splint this immediately. Someone thrust supplies into her hands. She worked quickly and efficiently, stabilizing the leg, checking carefully for arterial damage that could lead to life-threatening bleeding. Around her, men groaned in pain, some calling out in Korean. She moved from patient to patient with practiced efficiency, triaging, treating, keeping people alive until proper medical help could arrive. She didn't notice the man approaching from her blind side until he grabbed her arm roughly, his fingers digging into her flesh. Pretty thing, aren't you? He slurred, his breath reeking of alcohol and smoke. What's a fat bitch like you doing playing doctor? Faith's body froze instinctively, muscle memory from too many similar encounters taking over. Not again. Not here. The man's grip tightened painfully, his other hand reaching for her chest. Let me... He didn't finish the sentence. Lee materialized behind him like a shadow, one hand clamping on the man's wrist with enough force that Faith heard bones crack audibly. The man screamed, "Touch her again, and I'll feed you to the dogs piece by piece," Lee said, his voice so cold Faith felt it in her bones. He threw the man to the ground where he lay whimpering. "Get him out of my sight, now." 2 men dragged the screaming drunk away. Lee turned to Faith, his expression shifting from murderous to concerned in an instant. "Are you hurt? Did he injure you?" Faith's hands were shaking, but she forced herself to breathe deeply, to center herself. "I'm fine. I need to finish treating these men." "Faith?" "I said I'm fine." She pulled away, moving to the next patient who was bleeding from a head wound, but she felt Lee's eyes on her for the rest of the long night, a constant protective presence that was both comforting and unsettling. The specialist arrived 2 days later as promised, Dr. Raj Malhotra, a reconstructive surgeon Faith had worked with years ago in Lagos when they'd both been part of an emergency medical team treating victims of a terrorist bombing. He was brilliant and discreet, 2 qualities fatalities worth their weight in gold. The examination took 3 intensive hours in a converted medical room within the compound. Faith assisted, her hands steady as Raj conducted nerve conduction studies using specialized equipment, detailed imaging scans with a portable MRI unit, and psychological assessments using standardized trauma screening tools. Lee endured it all with stoic silence, but Faith saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched when Raj probed certain areas, the slight flinch when memories of trauma were triggered. Finally, Raj pulled off his gloves with a snap and gestured for Faith and Eleanor to join him outside the examination room. The good news: the nerve damage is repairable through microsurgical techniques. There's compression from scar tissue, but with surgery and aggressive physical therapy, I can restore function. Maybe not to 100%, but enough. And the bad news? Lee asked. The psychological component is extremely significant. Even if I fix the physical damage perfectly, your mind might still block the response through protective mechanisms. Your body has associated sexual arousal with extreme pain and trauma. You'll need therapy, real therapy, not just medication or simple counseling. Intensive, trauma-focused work. How long? Lee's voice was tight. Surgery next week once we finalize the approach. Recovery period, 4 to 6 weeks minimum depending on healing. Full results, 3 months, possibly 6 before we can assess complete functionality. Lee's expression shuddered. I don't have 3 months. Then you need to buy time, Raj said bluntly, or find another solution to your political problem. After Raj left to review the scans more thoroughly, Faith found Lee on the balcony, staring out to the city lights that glittered below like fallen stars. She brought him tea, something she'd learned he preferred in the evening, jasmine green tea without sugar. 3 months is impossible, he said without turning. Victor will move before then. The council meeting is in 6 weeks. Then we make it possible. Faith set the tea down on the small table. Victor wants proof you're weak, so we give him proof you're not. How? Faith had been thinking about this since Eleanor's revelation, turning possibilities over in her mind. The medical issue isn't really the problem from a political standpoint. It's what it represents. Your vulnerability, your inability to produce an heir to secure your bloodline, your perceived weakness. So we attack those perceptions directly instead of waiting for medical treatment to resolve the physical issue. She moved to stand beside him. You need to demonstrate strength in ways that matter to the council. Take aggressive action against Victor's operations. Show them you're still the apex predator. And you need me to quietly spread word that you're seeking treatment, that the issue is being resolved through medical intervention. Make it a power move, not a weakness. Lee Min-ho is so confident that he openly admits his vulnerabilities and crushes anyone who dares exploit them. Lee turned to look at her, his dark eyes intense. You think like a strategist, like someone trained in political maneuvering. I think like a survivor. Faith met his gaze. And right now, we're both fighting to survive in our own ways. Why do you care? The question was soft, genuine. You could take your money and disappear into any city in Africa or beyond. Why stay here? Why risk getting involved in something dangerous? Because you defended me without hesitation. Because you see me as human when most people see me as a joke. Because for the first time in years, I feel like I matter, like my skills and intelligence are valued. Faith couldn't say any of that, giving her time to pull away or reject his touch. When she didn't move, he tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear with surprising gentleness, his fingers warm against her skin. You're extraordinary, Faith Lewis. Truly extraordinary. Her breath caught in her throat. Before she could respond, formulate any kind of reply, Lee's phone rang shrilly. He answered, listened, his expression darkening moment by moment. When? A pause. I'm coming now. He hung up. We have a situation. My men found evidence that the warehouse explosion wasn't an accident. It was a coordinated hit, and they have a suspect in custody. Someone on my inner circle. Someone I trusted. Faith's blood ran cold. Who? That's what I'm going to find out. Stay here. No. Faith grabbed her bag. "If there's a traitor in your organization, they know about me by now. Staying here alone makes me a target. I'm safer with you." Lee's jaw tightened, but he nodded grimly. "Stay behind me, always. And if I tell you to run, you run without question." They drove to a different location, an old factory on the outskirts of Lagos that Lee's organization used for interrogations and other activities that required privacy. The building was isolated, surrounded by empty lots and abandoned structures. Faith had seen violence in her work, but nothing prepared her for the systematic brutality of Lee's world. The suspect was tied to a chair in the center of a large room, blood dripping from his split lip, one eye swollen shut, bruises forming on his exposed arms and torso. Several of Lee's men stood around the perimeter, their expressions cold and professional. "Talk," Lee commanded without preamble. "Who paid you to sabotage the warehouse?" The man spat blood onto the concrete floor. "Fuck you!" Lee moved with terrifying precision, landing a punch that snapped the man's head back. Faith flinched but didn't look away. "I'll ask once more, then we move to more persuasive methods." "Victor Park!" the man screamed, his resistance crumbling. "Victor paid me. He promised to make me a captain in the new order if I helped bring you down." "What else?" Lee's voice was deadly calm. "What's the plan? What's coming?" There's another attack." The man was sobbing now. "Tomorrow night, your compound. Victor's bringing in outside muscle, 20 men, heavily armed mercenaries. They're going to kill everyone and make it look like a rival gang hit, eliminate your entire inner circle." Faith's stomach dropped. 20 armed men. This wasn't just a power play. This was an execution, a complete takeover. Lee turned to his second-in-command, a lean man named Marcus Kim. "Get everyone to the safe house, now. Leave a skeleton crew to make it look occupied, but I want women, children, non-combatants out within the hour." "What about you?" Marcus asked. "I'm ending this tonight." Lee looked at Faith. "I'm taking you somewhere safe." "No." Faith stepped forward, her mind racing through possibilities. "Listen to me carefully. You can't just evacuate and wait for Victor to attack an empty compound. He'll know you figured out his plan, and he'll change tactics, disappear, and regroup. You need to turn his attack against him." Lee's eyes narrowed with interest. "What are you suggesting?" "A trap. Let him think he has the element of surprise, but we prepare. Position your best people in defensible locations, fortify critical areas, set up ambush points that funnel attackers into kill zones, and," she hesitated, "and you need me there." "Absolutely not." "Yes." Faith's voice was firm, brooking no argument. "Because when his men come, some of yours will get hurt. Gunshot wounds, shrapnel injuries, blunt force trauma. You'll need immediate medical intervention. The difference between life and death in trauma is measured in minutes, not hours. I can set up a triage station in the most protected area. Keep your people alive while they fight. You're not a soldier. You have no combat training." "No, but I'm a nurse who's worked in emergency rooms where people came in with gunshot wounds, stab wounds, crush injuries from car accidents. I've worked trauma situations where we lost power and had to operate by flashlight." She moved closer to him. "And think about the message it sends to your organization and to Victor. Lee Min-ho is so confident, so secure in his power that he brings his personal nurse to a battle." "It's not weakness, it's absolute power." Lee stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he smiled slightly. "You're terrifying, do you know that? In the best possible way. I'm practical." Faith allowed herself a small smile back. "So, do we have a plan?" The next 24 hours were a blur of intense preparation. Lee's men transformed the compound into a fortress, reinforced defensive positions with sandbags and steel plates, hidden weapons caches strategically placed throughout the building, carefully placed barriers that would funnel attackers into carefully planned kill zones where Lee's people would have maximum advantage. Faith set up her medical station in the reinforced basement, the most protected area of the compound, with thick concrete walls on all sides. She stocked supplies meticulously: IV fluids, antibiotics, pain medications, surgical tools, bandages, tourniquets, chest seals for pneumothorax, everything she might need to keep wounded men alive. She organized instruments by likely need, ran through trauma protocols in her head repeatedly, prepared blood typing equipment. Eleanor helped her prepare, carrying supplies down the stairs. "You don't have to do this," the older woman said quietly as she set down another box of medical supplies. "Lee would understand if you left. He wouldn't hold it against you. Would he?" Faith taped down an IV line setup. "Or would he see it as another person abandoning him when he's vulnerable, when he needs support most?" Eleanor smiled sadly. "You see him clearly. Not many people do. They see the power, the violence, the danger. You see the man underneath. He's not hard to see. People just choose not to look past the surface because it's easier to fear him than understand him." Faith checked her supplies one more time, mentally cataloging everything. "Tell me the truth. Do we actually have a chance of surviving this? Lee has survived impossible odds before. He's brilliant at strategy, ruthless when necessary, and his men are loyal." Eleanor shook her head. "But this? Victor is bringing serious firepower, professional mercenaries. Even with preparation, we'll lose people, good people. Then I better be ready to save as many as I can." Night fell slowly. Lee's skeleton crew moved through the compound in normal patterns, maintaining the illusion of regular activity. Lights turning on and off in various rooms, occasional movement past windows, everything designed to look like a normal evening. The real fighters were hidden, on roofs with sniper rifles, in false walls with automatic weapons, behind reinforced positions covering every entrance and corridor. Faith waited in her medical station, checking equipment one final time. Her hands were steady despite her racing heart. She'd changed into scrubs, easier to work in, easier to clean blood from. Her hair was pulled back tightly. Everything was ready. Lee appeared at 10 p.m., fully armed and wearing tactical gear that somehow made him look even more dangerous than usual. Kevlar vest, tactical belt with ammunition and weapons, communications gear. He looked like he'd stepped out of a military operation. "Last chance to leave," he said, his voice gentle despite the circumstances. "I have a car ready. I can have you at the safe house in 20 minutes. "Not a chance," Faith stood. "But before this starts, I need to know. The surgery, the treatment plan, after tonight, are you going through with it regardless of the political situation?" "Yes." Lee's voice was certain, unwavering. "You showed me that fixing this isn't weakness or surrender. It's taking back control of my own body, my own life." "Good." Faith reached up. She had to stand on her toes even though Lee had crouched slightly to accommodate her height, and straightened his tactical vest, adjusting a strap. "Then stay alive. I have a specialist booked, and I don't like wasting appointments or good surgical time." Lee caught her hand, his fingers warm and strong around hers. "Faith." Gunfire erupted outside, shattering the moment. Lee's radio crackled urgently. "They're coming! East and west entrances simultaneously, multiple vehicles." "Hold positions," Lee commanded into the radio with absolute authority. "Let them commit. Spring traps on my signal." Then to Faith, his voice softer. "Stay here. No matter what you hear, no matter how bad it sounds, don't come out until I come for you or Marcus gives the all clear." He disappeared up the stairs 3 at a time. Faith heard the battle begin, the thunder of automatic weapons fire, the shouts of men in multiple languages, the crash of breached doors, explosions that made the building shake. She forced herself to breathe, to stay calm, to focus on what she could control. The first injured man arrived within 5 minutes, carried by 2 fighters who were themselves bleeding from minor wounds. Gunshot wound to the shoulder, through and through. The bullet had passed completely without hitting major arteries. Faith got to work immediately, her training taking over completely. Pack the wound to control bleeding, check carefully for arterial damage, start an IV for fluid replacement, administer pain medication and antibiotics. "Get back up there," she told the 2 men who'd carried him. I've got him." More casualties came in waves. A deep knife wound to the abdomen. She packed it, started fluids, monitored for signs of internal bleeding. A crushed hand from hand-to-hand combat. She splinted it, gave pain medication, marked him for evacuation to a hospital later. A head injury from falling debris. She checked for skull fracture, monitored his pupils, kept him still. Faith worked without stopping, her hands sure despite the chaos above, her voice calm as she directed her two assistants, Lee's men with basic first aid training who helped move patients and fetch supplies. Blood soaked her scrubs, her hands cramped from the intensity of the work, but she kept going. Upstairs, the battle raged with terrible intensity. She heard explosions that made the ceiling crack, screams of wounded and dying men, the distinctive sounds of close-quarters combat. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to escape this nightmare. But these men were depending on her. Lee was depending on her. A young fighter stumbled down the stairs, clutching his side, his face pale with shock and blood loss. "Doctor, it's the boss. He's hit bad. They're bringing him down." Faith's heart stopped for a moment. Then two men appeared, supporting Lee between them, his weight pulling them down. Blood soaked his entire left side, spreading across his tactical vest in a dark stain that was growing. "Get him on the table, now!" Faith snapped into command mode, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Tell me what happened. When was he hit? How much blood has he lost?" "Ambush in the north corridor maybe 5 minutes ago," one of the men panted, struggling under Lee's weight. "He took 3 of them out himself, but one got a shot in before we could—" "I don't need the story. I need medical details. How long ago exactly? Did he lose consciousness? Any other injuries?" Faith was already cutting away Lee's vest with trauma shears, exposing the wound. High on his left side, below the ribs. The bullet could have hit his spleen, liver, kidney, any number of organs that could cause rapid death if damaged. "Faith." Lee's voice was weak but clear, his eyes finding hers. "Victor's here. In the building. He's coming for—" "Shut up and let me work." Faith's hands were steady despite her terror as she examined the wound with practiced efficiency. Entry point, but no exit. The bullet was still inside somewhere. She couldn't remove it here, not with proper surgical equipment and imaging, but she could stabilize him, control the bleeding, keep him alive long enough to get him to a real hospital. She worked with focused intensity, packing the wound with hemostatic gauze, starting a second IV line for aggressive fluid resuscitation, administering antibiotics and pain medication. Lee watched her through pain-glazed eyes, but she could see awareness there, see him fighting to stay conscious. "You should go," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If Victor finds you here, then he finds me. I'm not leaving you to die." Faith checked his blood pressure, dropping but not critical yet. His pulse was rapid but strong. He was stable for now. Footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, measured, confident. Not the rushed steps of Lee's men, but the deliberate pace of someone who believed they'd already won. Faith looked up as a man descended slowly, tall, silver-haired, probably in his 60s, wearing an expensive suit that was somehow unmarred by the battle raging above. Victor Park. 2 armed men flanked him, their weapons trained on Faith. "Well, well," Victor said, his accent similar to Lee's but colder, each word precisely enunciated. "The great Lee Min-ho, brought down by a simple bullet. How poetic. How fitting." His eyes fixed on Faith with predatory interest. "And who's this? The nurse I've heard such interesting whispers about?" Faith straightened slowly, placing herself directly between Victor and Lee's vulnerable form on the table. "This area is under medical quarantine. Leave immediately." Victor laughed, a sound without warmth. "Bold, admirably bold. I see why my nephew likes you." He gestured casually to his men. "Kill her first. Make him watch, then finish him slowly." The men raised their weapons. Faith closed her eyes, bracing for the impact, for the pain, for death. The gunshots came, but the pain didn't. Faith opened her eyes. Victor's 2 men were on the ground, blood pooling rapidly beneath their bodies. Standing in the doorway was Marcus Kim, his weapon still raised and smoking. "Sorry I'm late, boss," Marcus said calmly, his voice professional. "We've secured the building." "Victor's men are either dead or surrendered. It's over." Victor's confidence cracked, his expression shifting to fear. "You can't kill me. The council has rules." "The council can go to hell," Lee rasped from the table, pushing himself up slightly despite Faith's restraining hand. "Marcus, take him to the holding cells. I want him alive for questioning. We need to know who else was involved." As Marcus and 2 other men who'd appeared dragged the struggling Victor away, Faith returned her full attention to Lee. "You need a hospital, real surgery with proper equipment. I've done what I can, but that bullet needs to come out by a real surgeon in a real OR." "Later." Lee tried to sit up fully, winced at the pain. "First, we need to secure—" "No, not later, now." Faith's voice was absolutely firm, leaving no room for argument. "You can consolidate power and handle Victor after you're not actively bleeding internally. You hired me to keep you alive. Let me do my job properly." Lee studied her face for a moment, then smiled weakly. "Yes, ma'am. I know better than to argue with my nurse." The surgery took 6 grueling hours. Dr. Raj Malhotra performed it in a converted surgical suite within Lee's compound. Too risky to move Lee to a public hospital where Victor's remaining allies might strike, where questions would be asked that couldn't be answered safely. Faith assisted throughout, her hands steady even as exhaustion pulled at her consciousness, even as her legs ached from standing for so long. The bullet had nicked Lee's spleen but fortunately missed the major vessels. Incredibly lucky considering the trajectory and angle. Raj removed the bullet carefully, repaired the splenic damage with precise sutures, checked for any additional internal injuries, and declared Lee would make a full recovery with proper rest and careful monitoring. "He'll be in significant pain for several weeks," Raj told Faith afterward as they scrubbed out. "Keep him on the medication schedule religiously. Watch carefully for signs of infection or internal bleeding, and for God's sake, don't let him do anything stupid like trying to work or fight within the next month." "That last part might be impossible given his personality," Faith replied, earning a tired laugh from Raj. "Then sedate him if necessary. Doctor's orders." Raj squeezed her shoulder. "You did excellent work tonight, Faith. Under impossible conditions. Those men you treated, at least 3 of them wouldn't have survived without your immediate intervention." She stayed by Lee's bedside for the next 3 days, monitoring his vitals every hour, changing his surgical dressings twice daily, forcing him to eat even when he had no appetite, managing his pain medication carefully to keep him comfortable without over-sedating him. The compound slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy around them. Repairs were made to damaged structures, wounded were treated and sent home or to hospitals with cover stories. Funerals were held for the 3 men who died defending the compound. On the 4th day, Lee woke fully alert to find Faith dozing in the chair beside his bed, her head tilted at an awkward angle that would probably give her a terrible neckache, dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep, her scrubs still stained with blood from the battle. "Faith," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She jerked awake immediately, her nurse instincts kicking in as she reached for his wrist to check his pulse. "How's your pain level? Any nausea, fever, dizziness?" "I'm fine, better than fine, thanks to you." Lee caught her hand gently. "You saved my life, during the battle and after. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't set up that medical station, if you hadn't known exactly what to do, that's what you paid me for initially." "No, I paid you to consult on a medical issue, to give me an assessment and recommendation. You've done so much more than that." Lee's grip tightened on her hand. "You stood between me and an armed man without hesitation. You refused to run when any sane person would have fled for their life. You've become—" "What?" Faith's voice was barely a whisper, afraid to hear the answer but needing it desperately. Essential, irreplaceable. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. Faith wanted to pull away, to protect herself from the inevitable hurt that came from caring too much, from investing in something that couldn't last. But she was so tired of running, so tired of being alone, so tired of protecting herself by never letting anyone matter. What happens now? Faith asked, her voice uncertain. Now we finish what we started. Lee's voice grew stronger despite his injuries. Victor's attack failed completely. His allies on the council are scrambling to distance themselves, denying they knew anything about the plan. I have extensive evidence of his treachery. Recordings from his captured men, witnesses who will testify, financial trails showing how he funded the mercenaries. The council will vote to strip him of rank and exile him permanently. My position is secure. Probably stronger than before. And the other issue? The medical treatment? Lee's expression softened. We proceed exactly as planned. Surgery in 3 weeks, once I've healed enough from this injury. And the therapy. I've already spoken with a trauma specialist who's agreed to work with me. You were right about everything. I can't fix the physical without addressing the psychological trauma. That's good. I'm glad. Faith felt a relief wash over her. Then my job here is essentially done. Once you're recovered, I can... Is it? Lee pulled her closer gently, his dark eyes intense and searching. Is your job done? Or is it just beginning? Faith's breath caught in her throat. Lee, I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not even asking you to stay forever, to make promises neither of us can keep. His voice dropped lower, becoming almost vulnerable. But stay for now. Help me through the recovery, through the surgery and therapy. Let me show you what it's like to be truly protected, genuinely valued, completely seen for who you are. Let me give you what no one else has. Real respect, safety, a place where you matter. Faith thought about her empty apartment waiting back in the city, the hospital where her colleagues mocked her daily, the life she'd left behind that held nothing but pain and humiliation. And she thought about the last few weeks here, the purpose she'd discovered, the strength she'd found within herself, the man who'd defended her without hesitation, who'd protected her, who'd treated her like she was valuable. Okay, she whispered, the word barely audible. I'll stay. Lee's smile was genuine, transforming his face. Thank you. 6 months later, Faith stood in Lee's office, reviewing intelligence reports spread across his desk like she'd been doing this work her whole life. She'd discovered an unexpected talent for strategic analysis. Her medical training made her excellent at spotting patterns in data, identifying weaknesses in enemy operations, predicting outcomes based on available information. The Volkov organization is moving product through the southern docks according to these shipping manifests, she told Lee, pointing to specific entries on the manifest she'd obtained through one of their contacts. But their security is heavily concentrated here, on the main warehouse. If you wanted to disrupt their operation without direct confrontation that could start a war, you'd hit their transport trucks here, along this route, where they're most vulnerable and security is lightest. Lee studied the map carefully, his finger tracing the route. Then he smiled. Brilliant analysis. Marcus, implement Faith's plan exactly as she's outlined it. Marcus nodded with respect. Over the past months, Lee's entire organization had grown to respect Faith. She'd saved too many of their lives during Victor's attack for them to see her as anything but an invaluable asset. She treated their injuries, she provided strategic advice, and she'd become an integral part of their operations. The door burst open suddenly. Eleanor rushed in, her normally composed face pale with alarm. We have a serious problem. Helene Voss is back in the city. She's at the Meridian Club right now, meeting with Anatoly Volkov. Our sources say she's offering detailed information about our operations in exchange for protection and asylum. Lee's expression hardened instantly. How much does she know? enough to hurt us significantly. She was sleeping with one of our accountants before Victor's attack, pumping him systematically for sensitive information. She knows our financial structures, our shipping routes, possibly even safe house locations. Faith's mind raced through possibilities. Helene was the woman from the photograph, the one who'd tried to seduce Lee and then betrayed him to Victor. She was dangerous specifically because she understood how to weaponize intimacy, how to extract information through manipulation. "I have an idea," Faith said slowly, a plan forming, "but you're probably not going to like it initially." 20 minutes later, Faith walked into the exclusive Meridian Club wearing a designer dress that Eleanor had procured, tailored perfectly to flatter her curves rather than hide them, expensive fabric that whispered wealth with every movement. She'd learned something important over the past months. Confidence was the best accessory anyone could wear, and right now she had plenty of confidence. Helene sat in a private booth with Anatoly Volkov, a bear of a man with cold blue eyes and a reputation for extreme violence. Faith approached with a warm, professional smile. "Helene Voss, Faith Lewis, I'm Mr. Lee's personal physician and medical director." She extended her hand. "I'm so glad I found you here. There's an urgent medical situation I need to discuss with you, privately." Helene's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "I'm in a meeting. This concerns your immediate health, specifically the infection you may have contracted from Jungwoo Park." Faith kept her voice professional, purely medical. "He recently tested positive for a particularly resistant strain of a sexually transmitted infection. Anyone who had intimate contact with him needs immediate treatment. The infection can cause serious complications if left untreated: infertility, chronic pain, potentially even systemic infection." Helene's face went white, all color draining instantly. Jung-woo was the accountant she'd been sleeping with to extract information. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. These infections are quite common." Faith gestured toward the exit. "But treatment is time-sensitive. My car is outside. The treatment is simple, just antibiotics and a follow-up test. But we need to start immediately to prevent complications." Anatoly's expression shifted from interested to disgusted. "We'll reschedule," he told Helene coldly, clearly wanting nothing to do with potential infection. Helene had no choice but to follow Faith outside, where Lee's men were waiting. They grabbed her before she could scream, pulling her efficiently into the waiting car. In the back seat, Faith dropped the professional facade completely. "Jung-woo doesn't have an infection, but you do have a problem. You betrayed Lee Min-ho, and he wants to know exactly what you told Victor's organization and what you're selling to Volkov." Helene's face twisted with rage and fear. "You fat bitch, you think you can—" Faith's hand shot out with practiced precision, grabbing Helene's wrist and applying pressure to a specific nerve point that made the other woman gasp in sudden pain. "I'm a trauma nurse. I know exactly where every nerve cluster is located, how to cause maximum pain without leaving visible marks, so I strongly suggest you cooperate fully." By the time they reached the compound 30 minutes later, Helene had given up everything: Victor's entire network of contacts, the accountant's complete betrayal including copied financial records, the specific information she'd sold to various rivals, the locations of safe houses she'd compromised. Lee had what he needed to dismantle the remaining threats against his organization and secure his position permanently. "You were magnificent," Lee told Faith later in the privacy of his office after Helene had been secured. "I was practical, though I admit it felt good to turn her own weapons against her, to use manipulation right back." Lee moved closer, his hand cupping her cheek gently. "The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Are you nervous?" "No. Dr. Malhotra is genuinely the best in his field, and you've been doing the psychological work consistently. You're ready. I'm ready because you made me ready." Lee's thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "You've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope, real hope for the future." Faith's eyes stung with unexpected tears. "You gave me something too, purpose beyond just surviving." respect I'd never experienced before, a place where I genuinely matter, where my contributions are valued. You matter everywhere, Faith. The world just wasn't looking properly before. The surgery was completely successful. Dr. Raj Malhotra reported that nerve function had been restored, the scar tissue removed, the compressed nerve bundles carefully freed. 6 weeks of careful recovery followed, with intensive physical therapy and continued psychological counseling. Faith stayed by Lee's side through all of it, managing his complex medical care, running interference with his business operations when necessary, becoming absolutely indispensable to both his organization and his personal life. 3 months after the surgery, Lee called a formal meeting with his counsel. Faith waited outside the conference room, her stomach tight with nervous tension despite herself. This was the ultimate test. Could Lee prove he was whole, capable, fit to lead without any questions about his capability? The meeting lasted 2 tense hours. When Lee finally emerged, his expression was carefully unreadable. Then he smiled, that devastating smile that transformed his dangerous face into something almost tender. It's done, completely done. The council unanimously confirmed my leadership without conditions. Victor has been permanently exiled with orders that he'll be killed if he ever returns. My position is absolutely secure. Faith felt relief flood through her body. Congratulations! There's more. Lee pulled her into his office, closing the door. I told them about you, about how you saved my life during Victor's attack, how your medical expertise restored my health, how your strategic intelligence has helped secure multiple operations successfully. I proposed making you an official advisor to the organization with full authority. Faith's heart raced. What did they say? They agreed unanimously. You have a permanent place here, Faith, not as my nurse, but as my partner in every sense. Partner. The word settled over Faith like a warm blanket, heavy with responsibility and possibility and hope. I accept, she said firmly. On one condition. Name it. We're equals in this partnership. I'm not your subordinate or your dependent. If I'm advising you, you actually listen to my counsel. If I see something wrong or dangerous, I speak up without fear of consequences. If I need to walk away someday, you let me go without retribution or threats. Lee studied her face seriously, then extended his hand formally. Partners. True partners in every way. Faith shook his hand firmly, sealing the deal. Then, because the moment felt right, and she was tired of hesitating, she pulled him down and kissed him. Not the gentle, tentative kiss of someone unsure, but the claiming kiss of a woman who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to take what she wanted. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Lee's eyes were dark with desire, and something deeper. I should mention, the surgery was completely successful. Everything works perfectly now. Better than before, actually. Faith laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuine joy. Is that so? Well, we should probably conduct a thorough follow-up examination. For purely medical purposes, of course. Of course. Purely medical. They didn't leave the office for hours. Faith stood on the balcony of the compound, watching the sunset paint Lagos in brilliant golds and deep crimsons. 1 year ago, she'd been a nurse drowning in debt and humiliation, invisible and undervalued. Now she was Lee Min-ho's partner in every sense, his medical advisor, his strategic consultant, his lover, his equal. It wasn't always easy. Lee's world was violent and unforgiving, filled with dangers that normal people never imagined. She'd seen things that gave her nightmares, made choices that kept her awake wondering about her soul and her moral boundaries. But she'd also found genuine purpose, real power, and a man who saw her as she truly was, not despite her size or appearance, but as a complete person whose skills and intelligence mattered. Thinking deep thoughts? Lee wrapped his arms around her from behind, his warmth solid and reassuring against her back. Thinking about how strange life is, how one phone call changed absolutely everything. Regrets? Faith leaned back against him, secure in his embrace. Not one single regret. Lee's phone buzzed insistently. He checked it, his body tensing slightly. "We have a situation developing. Anatoly Volkov is moving aggressively against our northern operations. It's going to get bloody." 6 months ago, Faith would have been terrified by such news. Now she turned in his arms, her mind already working through scenarios, strategies, potential solutions. "Then we better get to work," she said calmly. They walked back inside together, equal partners preparing for whatever battle came next. Behind them, the sun set on who they used to be,